We're welcoming back Ted Sevransky, professional sports bettor out in Vegas. And Teddy and I have been doing videos on the Wildcard weekend last week. And we're going to go ahead and find out what we learned about Wildcard weekend. So first of all, Ted, I hope you had a profitable weekend. And if you will, let's break these games down one at a time in order that they took place. I know what I've certainly learned right out of the gate. You were hitting on this last week, Ted. Cold weather, unders is the way to go. There was not a whole lot of scoring. And I also learned right off of the top of this is that pedigree, experience, and ego play a big tool and factor into major games like that. So with that being said, Kansas City absolutely just whooped the ass of the Texans 30-0. What do you feel you might have learned from that you didn't know going in, or did something play out that you really thought would take place?
Well, I mean, the one thing that stands out for Kansas City in that game is that they really were able to take advantage of the absence of Dwayne Brown. Houston had a key injury on the offensive line. The Chiefs, their pass rushers have been banged up. Everybody played. Tom Bahali, Justin Houston, both in the lineup for KC, and they pretty much ate up the Texans at the line of scrimmage. Hoyer threw, 4 picks in that ball game. Wow. He was sacked. He was under pressure every time he went back to throw. His failures, in a large part, were due to the offensive line in front of him. And with Kansas City's defensive front getting healthier, the betting markets are offering a lot of respect for Kansas City moving forward. Of course, a team on an 11-game winning streak probably merits some respect. Key injury for the Chiefs, however, with Jeremy Maclin banged up. Don't know yet as to his status for this week. But we do know that Maclin is a difference maker for that Kansas City offense, not just in what he does, but in his ability to stretch the field, even on plays where he is not catching the football. He's a very effective decoy.
Yes, he is. And also, the quarterback issues were one thing, and I thought that Hoyer forced a few that maybe, he wished he would have had back. But one thing that we did touch on was that trend of teams winning 8 or more games going into the playoffs, and Kansas City, that certainly didn't shake them up, Ted, whatsoever. Alex Smith, he just looked like he was comfortable the whole game in the pocket when he needed to run, and I just see confidence building up in this team, and Andy Reid's got to be fired up, as do the Kansas City fans out there. 30-0. I mean, this team might be dangerous. Any thoughts on moving forward from there?
Well, the 0-13 trend is now a 1-13 trend. We talked about teams entering the postseason, having won 8 games or more, being significant recent point spread losers in the playoffs. And, of course, the Chiefs were that team, and the Chiefs had no problems winning and covering against the Texans. That being said, when we start to look at New England and some of the key guys they're getting back, the Patriots team that we've seen for the last 6 weeks, the team that went 2-4 straight up down the stretch, is not necessarily going to be the Patriots team that we see this coming weekend. New England's gotten a lot healthier, and that's likely to matter when they match up with Kansas City this weekend.
And one other note real quick before we move on to the next game, Ted, can you imagine if Jamal Charles would have been in this lineup and what this would mean at this point where they are? Again, it's about plugging holes, but I was thinking about that. Imagine if he was healthy.
I don't think it would have made a whole lot of difference. As we saw with Seattle yesterday, the elite running backs, they might win you a fantasy title. From a point spread perspective, has Kansas City been worse without Jamal Charles? Not even a little bit. Chandrick West has gotten the job done for them. And even when you're getting down to 3rd and 4th string backs and guys they're signing off the waiver wire, look at Fitz Toussaint for Pittsburgh the other day. A guy that didn't even exist, Jordan Todman. Running backs are irrelevant. They really are. And Jamal Charles, he's got an extra element of breakaway speed compared to the backs that KC's been going with for the last couple of months. But they've won every game without him. I'm not sure how much better they could have done.
And with that being said, we'll move on to the next one, Ted. This one, wow. I mean, got to be somebody waking up going, how did I let that happen? How did I fumble? But Pittsburgh beating Cincinnati, and I clearly thought after the nice A.J. Green touchdown, 25-yarder from McCarron, and then they get the interception, I thought it was over. And then that turnaround fluke fumble, I don't know what to call of all that. I just know that Big Ben got hurt. That's going to play into the future, obviously. But breaking this game down, what were your thoughts on Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, and did anything surprise you one way or the other?
Well, 2 of the 4 games this weekend were decided, let's call it what it was. Pittsburgh was lucky to beat Cincinnati. They were very lucky. You know, Seattle was lucky to beat Minnesota. We'll talk about that game in a few minutes. But 2 of the 4 games, the teams that are surviving and advancing, luck's the primary factor.
Yes.
And I know that everything about that game is all about Cincinnati's meltdown in the final minute, in the final seconds. You know, there are issues all over the place with the play that caused the meltdown for Cincinnati, whether it was a legal hit, whether it was an illegal hit. Questions persist in that regard. Whether, you know, Joey Porter being on the field is supposed to be flagged every bit as much as Pac-Man Jones being, you know, getting in a ref's face. And instead of being out of field goal range with no timeouts and a quarterback that doesn't have a downfield arm because he has a separated shoulder, there's, you know, Pittsburgh lining up for the 35-yard chip shot to win the game following the Hill fumble. I mean, some of that is, you know, I mean, to me, luck is a bigger factor than any other thing in terms of the straight-up outcome of that ball game. And luck's going to be a factor in some of these games. You can't, you know, handicapping will only go you so far. Of course, betting skills trumped any handicapping skills in that ball game.
Wow.
You know, if you took Cincy plus the field goal, you cashed. You took them plus 2.5, you cashed. There were plenty of Pittsburgh minus 1.5s out there at kickoff. You found one of those, you cashed. If your betting skills were up to par, they trumped anything when it came to handicapping the games.
Yeah, and I thought that also. That's why I grabbed Cincinnati early when it was available at 3. I mean, I thought they were going to win it outright, but I still thought that would be a comfortable number. And sure enough, it turned out to be, you know, a determining factor in cashing the ticket. Now, obviously, moving forward for them, I mean, they're getting ready to face a beast of a defense and the Denver Broncos, and we'll get to that. We're going to be doing a preview video on that. But I just saw also, though, with Pittsburgh is their secondary at times is really, really sloppy and kind of they're not in communication with each other. So I think they need to take a big look at that also. But my God, that poor Jeremy Hill, and I told a buddy of that, he's like, poor my ass, I'll kick him in the ass for what he did, you know, a big fumble like that. But wow, to have to be him to wake up to that. Yeah, that game then, I don't really think there's a whole bunch more to talk about, you know, defense, and cold weather, and Pittsburgh just, you know, again, pedigree, experience, possibly that played into it. But we'll see how Cincinnati bounces back from this next year with Dalton and, you know, just the psyche of this team losing a game that they really know that they could have won. Because like you said, Ted, 2 of these games were determined by luck, bottom line, and that's hard to handicap. Now, the next game, Seattle, Minnesota, I mean, I lost my ass on this one. I'll be the first to put it out there. I didn't see this coming. I knew Minnesota's defense would step up and play better than they did when they faced them weeks earlier, but I did not think Seattle's offense wouldn't find ways to produce, and I know, again, weather plays into it, but and I didn't expect Teddy Bridgewater to perform as well as he did. So what are your thoughts, Ted, on this Seattle-Minnesota low-scoring affair?
Well, I mean, the reality is that the weather was a huge factor for this ball game. I mean, it really was. We're talking about a situation in which on the Seahawks sideline, they were talking was minus 16 degrees compared to 4 degrees on the Minnesota sideline. So advantage Vikings in that regard, being on the sunny side of the field. But I mean, look, the Seahawks' 3 biggest plays of the game were all luck, complete luck. You know, the bad slap to Wilson where he catches the ball and then fires it downfield. Next thing you know, they're 1st and goal instead of being 2nd and 25 or whatever it would have been. An incredible play, but a lucky play.
Absolutely.
Then you have, obviously, the Adrian Peterson fumble. Fumble recoveries are 100% luck. And, of course, that one went to Seattle. They didn't even have to get a first down before they kicked what ended up being the game-winning field goal. And, of course, Blair Walsh's miss, where the holder couldn't get those, couldn't get the football turned around. Yep. And, you know, you don't see a lot of, 26, 27-yard field goals miss in the NFL. Brutal for the kicker. A bank error in Seattle's favor. And the Seahawks are able to survive in advance. And most importantly, they're able to survive in advance in a game where Russell Wilson really didn't play well. And that, you know, may bode quite positively for them moving forward.
Yeah, and you're right. You know, all their breaks were on luck, and I right away flashed back to last year's Super Bowl, and I said to myself, "Well, shit, if anybody deserves a little shot of luck, it's this team after what happened to them last year." But yeah, and they know it too, and I know they don't take that for granted because they were on the other side of that last year, and I think that strengthens them for their next battle against the Cardinals. But you know, one thing I will say too, they shut down Adrian Peterson, and I had touched on it earlier. That lower back issue with him, it was hurting him more than anybody knows, and I really think that had effect on how he was taken off the line, how he was shooting through the gap. So they did. They plugged him down. I mean, they literally just smothered him. Again, another interesting factor is Seattle, like you said, Wilson. He didn't perform as well as I thought, but that you have to take into consideration with the weather and everything else. So interesting to see how that moves forward next week. And Marshawn Lynch, his name, didn't hear it a whole lot yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, the announcers like to bring him up every so often.
Yeah.
But the reality, again, when you're talking about Marshawn Lynch, he's a name running back. He might move the needle on the point spread. In terms of the Seahawks being better with him on the field, obviously, they've been worse with him on the field this year. In the 7 games that Lynch played, they went 3-4 straight up.
Absolutely. Now, the Packers in Washington, Ted, in the beginning, that first quarter, I saw a shaky offense from the Packers, and I saw Aaron Rodgers just not looking comfortable, looking a little jittery and throwing off of his back foot. And when Washington got that safety, what I think was a big determining factor was that next drive when they held them to a field goal as opposed to a touchdown. I think that played heavily into the psyche. And I thought from the second quarter on, Packers looked comfortable. And I was thinking of what you said last week, that playoff pedigree, that championship pedigree. And even if there's a rift right now, which I heard also confirm what you had told me, McCarthy and Rodgers aren't seeing eye to eye. The bottom line at the end of the day, they both know how to win. So they were able to put it together and shut down that whole crowd, shut down Washington completely. I mean, in my eyes, after that first quarter specifically, it just really turned momentum-wise. What were your thoughts on the Packers in Washington, Ted?
Well, I mean, this is I'm not someone that tends to hide things. I wear my heart on my sleeve whenever I do videos. And this is one that I got completely wrong. I really thought the Redskins were the better of these two teams. And frankly, I didn't see a performance like that from Green Bay. Because a lot of it was, Washington didn't play well, particularly in the red zone. And there were two that for every good play that Washington had, there was a momentum killer at the end of it. You talked about Deshaun Jackson and his loafing and not getting into the end zone, and then the touchdown getting overturned, and then being forced to settle for 3. And they got another touchdown, and then, they missed the extra point. And boom, here's Green Bay celebrating on the sideline instead of Washington with a 16-0 lead and taking the Packers out of their game. Instead, it's only 11-0, and Green Bay can run the football. And that's, if you're going to ask me about the handicap of the game is that Green Bay ran the football. And when the Packers can run the football, all of a sudden that offense works. Defensively, they made enough stops. Even after taking the lead, Kirk Cousins drove the Redskins down the field, put them in the end zone again. But fourth quarter game on the line, Aaron Rodgers made plays and Kirk Cousins didn't. It really was that simple. And that playoff experience mattered a lot for the Packers in that regard. But it's an interesting dilemma moving forward with Green Bay. The team that we saw yesterday has got to be at least a field goal better than where I had Green Bay power rated at the end of the season. When they were not one of my elite teams coming down the stretch. They didn't play good football over the back half of the campaign. So if the Packers are that good, guess what? They're power rated wrong right now, and that +7 in Arizona looks real attractive.
Yeah.
But if Green Bay's success last week had more to do with, let's say, Washington's ineptitude on the defensive side of the football, well, then all of a sudden you may look at Green Bay as an overvalued commodity moving forward against an opponent that just dominated them by 4 touchdowns when they met back in Week 16. So an interesting thought process for Green Bay moving forward. Was it them being good? Is this something that is real? Or was it just the Redskins defense really didn't have it, Kirk Cousins really didn't have it, and that would make Green Bay something of an overvalued commodity? But, when that line opened Arizona -7/7.5, I'm like, boy, that's not a line based on the Packers team that I just saw. That's a line based on the Packers team over the entirety of the season. And the Packers team over the back half of the campaign, again, they were not anything resembling elite. They looked pretty good on Sunday.
Well, you brought up some good points there also, and it is with the Packers. I think it's just another confirmation of the inconsistency that they've shown after ripping off 6 wins right in a row and start the season. What Packers team is going to show up, and that's why I would shy against that. But for Washington, you touched on one point, because I'm a Philadelphia Eagle fan. I born and raised there, and that Deshaun, what's his name? Jackson. Yeah, when he pulled that thug move like he did, and that just shows me the difference between a professional that's a team player and a selfish player that wants the attention. And I saw that look on his face like, oh, we're going to just crush these guys, it's over. And boy, he sure got quiet in the second half. But yeah, Washington, I think, was a little bit in over their heads experience-wise, and it's going to be interesting to see how they build off of that next year, Ted, if Jay Gruden can, really surround that team with some leadership that I think they need. And Kirk Cousins hopefully will grow from that. But moving forward, it will be interesting to see what happens. And let's not forget that Packer defense had 6 sacks on Cousins yesterday, so they looked really good, and they made the adjustments necessary at halftime that obviously Washington didn't. So that's all the wild card games. And Ted, let's not forget before we get off the air, you and I have a very, very big bet tonight in the national championship game. You have Clemson plus 6.5. I've got Bama minus 6.5. And if I win, you're flying me to Vegas for that steak dinner. And if you win, I'm flying you to Costa Rica for a steak dinner. So a lot's on the line for us tonight, my man. So good luck to you, and we'll be back with you shortly.